A Wife in London by Thomas Hardy, written in December 1899, was first published in 1901 in his collection Poems of the Past and Present. It is one of 5 anti-war poems he wrote as a response to the Second Boer War, a conflict that took place in South Africa between 1899 and 1902. This was basically a colonial war between the British Empire on the one hand and the 2 Boer republics, comprising descendants of the Dutch settlers, on the other, following the discovery of gold deposits in the Transvaal, an area which was under the control of the Boers at the time. The resulting British victory meant that the land occupied by the Boer republics was absorbed into the British Empire. This later became the Republic of South Africa in 1961. This military victory came at no small cost, however, with the total number of casualties reaching almost 150,000, with nearly a third of them civilians, comprising Africans who were not directly involved in the conflict, and Boer women and children, all of whom had been interned in separate concentration camps. Even as early as 1899, Hardy reveals his already ambivalent attitude to war. I take a keen pleasure in war strategy and tactics, following it as if it was a game of chess. But all the while I am obliged to blind myself to the human side of the matter. Directly I think of that, the romance becomes somewhat tawdry and worse. His poetry of this period reflects his belief in the ultimate absurdity and futility of war, and demonstrates his concerns not only for the experiences of the individual, but also for the tragedy of the resulting waste of human life. A Wife in London poignantly captures the devastating impact of war on the home front through the perspective of a grieving wife. Set in Victorian London, the poem is divided into 2 sections, the tragedy and the irony, and highlights the emotional journey upon which she embarks, from receiving the tragic news in a curt and impersonal telegram of her husband's death on the battlefield, to the ironic arrival the following day of his loving letter, written some weeks before his demise, in which he optimistically talks of their future happiness together. Through this juxtaposition, the disparity between the slowness of the mailship, which took a number of weeks to deliver the soldier's letter, and the near instantaneous speed of the telegraphic system, brutally underscores the tragedy and the far-reaching consequences of war, which cut young and healthy people down, who otherwise would have had a whole life ahead of them. The poem comprises 4 stanzas of 5 lines each. There is no fixed metrical or rhythmic structure, although, due to the predominance of iambs, didum, and anapaests, dididum, e.g., that the Thames-side lanes have uprolled, the overall metre, apart from lines 1 and 4 of each stanza, can be described as rising. What makes the rhythm downbeat, however, is the fact not only that these metrical feet are not in any regular arrangement, but also that lines are not of a uniform length, ranging as they do between 5 and 10 syllables. Enjambment is also used effectively to modulate the rhythm to enhance meaning, while caesura is used sparingly to add emphasis and to create tone. There's a set rhyme scheme of A, B, B, A, B, where the B rhymes in each stanza are single or masculine, falling as they do on a single stressed syllable, e.g. uprolled, fold, and cold. The A rhymes, however, are double or feminine, falling on both a stressed and an unstressed syllable, e.g. vapour and taper, and effectively create an amphibrach, didumdi, at the ends of these lines, further highlighted by their being justified to the far left, while all the other lines are indented. A falling rhythm is therefore produced in lines 1 and 4 of each stanza, further adding to the poem's sombre, uneasy tone and claustrophobic atmosphere. Sound patterning techniques such as alliteration, e.g. shaped so shortly and now knows, consonants, e.g. knock cracks and street lamp glimmers cold, and combinations of the two, e.g. firelight flicker, enhance meaning and add to the poem's melancholic musicality. Hardy's diction is reasonably straightforward and understated, although he does use vocabulary and make reference to conditions, incidents and things that would have been commonplace in Victorian England, which are not now, such as the tawny vapour or smog, often referred to as a pea super, that blanketed London, the tapers or candles used in the street lamps in the absence of electric lighting, the messengers who brought the flashed news that was shaped so shortly, or telegrams, the far south land or the territories of the British Empire in the south of the African continent, and penned in highest feather, or the quills used for writing. The poem is written in the present tense, which gives it a sense of immediacy, helping to underscore the rawness of the woman's grief, and in the third person, which does, to some extent, distance the speaker from this unfortunate anonymous lady. Hardy instead uses the juxtaposition of the tragedy and the irony to create a sense of pathos, as the reader is able to imagine for themselves the devastating grief the woman feels to read the words of a husband who only a few weeks previously had been alive and well. Although there are few individual instances of figurative language, i.e. there is a single simile in stanza 1, like a waning taper, and a euphemism for death in stanza 3, whom the worm now knows, Hardy does make use of pathetic fallacy in order for the reader to infer the woman's anguished mental state, i.e. the gloom of her external surroundings in London, created by the smog, reflects her own gloominess as she waits helplessly for news of or from her husband, who is many thousands of miles away. This smog, appositely, hangs thicker the day after she has been informed of his death, to reflect the oppressive and inescapable nature of her increased grief, as her world has just become that much smaller. The murkiness of the conditions could also be an allusion to the moral murkiness that surrounded the Boer War, which was an aggressive act of territorial expansion on the part of the British, at the expense of many human lives. The title, A Wife in London, is a reference to the woman from whose perspective the poem will be told. The fact that she, as a wife, is referred to in terms of her relationship to another human, i.e. a husband, suggests that this will be as much about him as it is about her. The way she is described as being in London suggests that her husband is elsewhere. The use of the indefinite article a rather than the perhaps suggests that she is just one of many wives to be arbitrarily stricken by this sudden and world-shattering loss. The first section of the poem, the tragedy, begins. She sits in the tawny vapour that the Thames-side lanes have uprolled. Right from the beginning, we can see from the verb sits that the woman is very passive. All she can do is wait for things to happen to her, for news to arrive, or for her husband to return home to her. The adjective tawny to describe the vapour or fog denotes an orangey yellowy brown and suggests that London, as was customary during the Victorian era, is blanketed in smog, caused by pollution from factories and fires. The second line describes how this smog has, in a word created by Hardy, uprolled or moved upwards in a billowing motion from the River Thames. Note that she is not physically sitting outside in the smog, she is indoors. However, Hardy describes it this way to convey the woman's sense of isolation, as the fog outside her window symbolically separates her from the outside world. This choice of phrasing also enhances the use of pathetic fallacy, making the external environment reflect her internal feelings more vividly. Hardy elaborates this image in the remainder of the stanza to establish the poem's gloomy and oppressive atmosphere. Behind whose webby fold on fold like a waning taper the street lamp glimmers cold. The adjective webby alludes to cobwebs and evokes how the smog seems to have an insidious presence as it stealthily approaches in a swelling, rippling manner, fold on fold, entrapping everything in its path. The smog is so thick that it is difficult to make out the street lamp, reduced as it is to a glimmer, as its light gets progressively weaker, like a waning taper, or a slim candle that is slowly going out. Note the consonants of the liquid l sound in this line with lamp glimmers cold, which enhances the lack of comfort and warmth in the quality of the light. The woman is snapped out of her inertia as a messenger's knock cracks smartly at her front door. Note Hardy's use of consonants here with the guttural k sound in the onomatopoeic knock cracks to evoke the sharp sound that breaks into this otherwise muffled world. He hands over a telegram. Flashed news in her hand of meaning it dazes to understand, though shaped so shortly. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the first recorded use of the term newsflash appeared in an American publication in 1904, 5 years after this poem was written. It is, however, plausible that the term was already in spoken use before then. Its meaning, an urgent news item interrupting regular programming, is especially relevant here, as the burst of information it conveys will irrevocably alter her world. Note how the enjambment and the somewhat jumbled syntax of these lines help to evoke the sudden wave of stunned confusion that she feels. She is struggling to process what she is reading, even though the message is shaped so shortly, or written in so very few words. In the early days of telegraphy, telegrams were necessarily very brief due to cost, efficiency, and rudimentary technology. These limitations, however, mean that this tragic news is delivered in a terse and unfeeling manner, enhanced by the hushing sibilance of shaped so shortly. He has fallen in the far south land. Note the use of 2 M dashes here to evoke the woman's shock as she struggles to absorb the news. The use of the verb fallen to describe the fact that he has been killed in battle is a euphemism often used in official contexts and on memorials to create a sanitized, graceful and heroic image of sacrifice for the greater good, when it must actually have been brutal, chaotic and painful slaughter. The ellipsis at the end of the first part of the poem not only indicates that time will have passed before the next part begins, but also, perhaps, suggests the way in which the telegram falls from the woman's hands as she collapses from the shock. The second part of the poem, The Irony, opens on the next day. 'Tis the morrow, and the fog hangs thicker. The woman's external surroundings mirroring her internal world as, stifled and choked by grief, she struggles to come to terms with her loss. The postman nears and goes. A letter is brought whose lines disclose by the firelight flicker his hand, whom the worm now knows. The postman has delivered a letter from her husband, written several weeks earlier and brought up through the Atlantic Ocean on a mail ship. There is no light in the room other than the firelight flicker. Note the combined alliteration of the fricative f and the liquid l to evoke the woman's subdued surroundings. By this dim light she is able to make out her husband's handwriting, although the hand that wrote it now is, according to the euphemism, whom the worm now knows, buried, along with the rest of him, in foreign soil. The nasal consonants of the sound in whom and worm, combined with the nasal alliteration of the n sound in now knows, enhances this sombre tone. The final stanza, in contrast to the preceding three, has an upbeat tone as it describes the content of the husband's final letter. Fresh, firm, penned in highest feather. The image, penned in highest feather, is perhaps an allusion to the use of a quill pen and suggests not only the way the husband held it enthusiastically and energetically aloft, but also that he was in the prime of life. Note the alliterated fricative f sounds in fresh, firm and feather, which also add a sense of energy to the line, and the em dashes which emphasise the adjectives fresh and firm by enforcing them to be stressed. The letter is page full of his hoped return, and of home-planned jaunts of break and burn in the summer weather, and of new love that they would learn. The husband has been planning for their shared future when he returns home. The noun break is an archaic and literary word for a thicket or dense group of ferns, while the noun burn is a word mainly used in Scotland and the north of England for a small stream. In other words, he has been dreaming about the jaunts or short trips they will make together in the countryside during the summer weather just for pleasure. Note the preponderance of plosive consonants such as p and b here, i.e. page full of his hoped return and of home-planned jaunts of break and burn. The way these consonant sounds burst from the mouth inject these lines with a sense of energy. Not only would they go on these trips for fun, but they would also get to know each other all over again after having been apart for so long, and of new love that they would learn. The juxtaposition of this jaunty tone with the subdued and melancholic tone of the previous three stanzas highlights the poem's sense of pathos. Now a widow, the woman's loss is made even more stark as she is painfully reminded of a future full of shared love and joy that she will no longer be able to have. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.